Good afternoon, everyone. We left off the last video with a major event in U.S. history, which was, of course, when the colonists, in order to stop the Tea Act, dressed up like Native Americans and dumped tea into the Boston Harbor. The British Parliament was not going to just sit there and let the colonists do this. They were going to crack down on them. They were gonna make those colonists pay. And so they responded by passing a series of acts known as the Coercive Acts, or as the colonists preferred to call them, the Intolerable Acts. Now remember, the colonists had been able to monitor and control and govern themselves for centuries. They'd been doing this for a long time. I shouldn't say centuries, but well over a century of basically ruling themselves. The Coercive Acts sought to totally undo that. Suddenly, Britain closed down the port of Boston and placed the city under military rule. So the redcoats, the British soldiers, were marching the streets. They were controlling every aspect, or trying to control every aspect of what was going on in Boston. It also stipulated that any British soldier accused of a crime was going to be tried in Britain, where he was most likely going to get away with whatever crime he committed, as opposed to the colonies where he was most likely not going to get away with what he committed. In addition, Boston would have to pay back all of the revenue that was dumped down in the tea. So they were literally going to make the colonists pay for the lost tea, and it also required that colonists had to find ways to provide housing for any British soldiers in the area. Now, you could argue that the colonists may have done something wrong, but when people overreact and people punish too hard, that makes everyone get angry. And that's exactly what happened. The colonists were now all enraged, not just people living in Boston. Their worst fears seemed to be turning into a reality. Here was this evil king taking over. It was a scary idea. These ideas, these things that were going on, these laws needed to be stopped. But how? The citizens of Boston, they were rowdy and they had money, but they could hardly stop the greatest empire of the world. The only hope at all, and this was a long hope, was for the colonies to all unite as one. Now remember the Albany Plan of Union, the snake cut up into all the different pieces? And even with the Albany Plan of Union, the colonies could not unite back in 1754. Now they were trying it again. And so they had representatives from all 13 colonies, except for one. All 13 colonies, they tried to get together to meet in Philadelphia. And they met in Philadelphia in 1774 to form the first Continental Congress. And they were meant to discuss how to deal with the Intolerable Acts, or the Coercive Acts. And most of the 56 representatives had absolutely no desire whatsoever to fight a large-scale war against Great Britain. They did not want to try and fight for independence. Most people had no desire to get that. Heck, this was Boston's problem. Why would somebody in South Carolina want to go and die for someone in Boston? Doesn't make sense. So they wanted to, and also, why fight Britain? You're probably going to lose. You know, you might as well get in a fight with a big, scary polar bear. I mean, got better odds with the polar bear, probably. Now, they didn't do much in the First Continental Congress, but they did request Britain repeal all the laws passed 1763, which, of course, Britain refused. But here's the big thing, they created a militia, or an armed group of citizens to be prepared to defend the colonies. It wasn't a strong militia, it was a very weak, pitiful militia, but they did have a militia. Now note, they were not planning to attack Great Britain. They wanted the militia there to defend if Britain attacked. That was the goal. So the First Continental Congress met. They weren't really doing a lot, but it signified that they were meeting and discussing and starting to come together. Now, they finished their meeting in October, so representatives could go back to their colonies, and the question that was on everyone's mind, is there going to be fighting soon? Is there going to be violence? British General Sir Thomas Gage, by this point, had 3,000 soldiers right around Boston, and he wanted to make sure that the colonists had no weapons at all. Well, as you can imagine, the colonists were holding on to their weapons, just in case there was fighting. And they were also holding on to the ammunition. So Gage then found out that guns and ammunition were being held in a nearby town, a town close to Boston called Concord. And he sent 700 troops there to take the guns and the ammunition. Now, little did he know that the colonists actually had a good system in place to alert everyone. Paul Revere, the great Paul Revere, the wealthy silversmith, was one of those people who seemed to know all the important people. He was that sort of really cool guy or the popular guy that everybody liked, and he knew everyone, could get everyone to do what he wanted. And on April 18th, 1775, Paul Revere found out that the British were on their way to Concord, and he let everyone know whom he could that the British were going to attack. So the soldiers showed up. Soldiers showed up at Concord almost immediately, and they were called Minutemen because they could arrive at a minute's notice, they said. The rough and tumble Minutemen of the colonies. And the American colonists, these Minutemen, met the British soldiers at the Lexington Green, a field in Lexington. They stared at each other, and suddenly a shot went off. Boom! And then there was fighting. Who fired that first shot? If you asked a British soldier, they would say, oh, the Americans fired the first shot. If you asked an American, the American would say, oh, the British, they fired the first shot. Who fired what was known as the shot were heard around the world? Who knows? We will never know, but we will know that that shot began the series of events that became known as the Revolutionary War. Now, shortly after the fighting at Lexington, the British arrived at Concord. The warning system had worked, and most of the ammunition were gone. And the British didn't really achieve a great victory at Concord. They were sort of humiliated because they were expecting to walk in, take the guns, and go home. And really, a fair number of British soldiers were killed. Now, we know that Lexington and Concord were the first battles that began the Revolutionary War. We know that's the beginning of the Revolutionary War. However, most of the 13 colonies still did not want to go to war with Britain. They still believed that it would be possible for the Britain and the colonies to work things out. And figure, you know what, people in Virginia or South Carolina, North Carolina, they could say, you know what, this is not our problem. King George III, oh, King George, this is between you and us. Bostonians, they're crazy, they're weird, people in Boston, they're a little different. We don't need to be like, it's just you and I. Forget Boston. Forget Massachusetts. So many people still believed that there might not be a war. Even though they didn't realize it, the Revolutionary War had begun. The events at Lexington and Concord in April 1775 would be the start of the fighting that would cause the 13 little colonies to become the United States of America. But before those 13 colonies would become a nation and become one of the greatest nations on earth, they would have to fight a major war. How would that war go? What happened in the course of that war? How did they actually win this thing? That is the subject of some other videos. In the meantime, I hope you have a great afternoon, and I shall see you tomorrow, unless it is a Friday, in which case I shall see you Monday, unless, of course, it is a 3-day weekend, in which I will see you Tuesday or Wednesday. We might be shadowing, maybe Wednesday, I might be sick. I'll see you again.